Commander Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Defiant, watching the stars through the reinforced viewport. Around her, the crew worked quietly at their stations, their faces showing the same mixture of determination and resignation she felt in her own chest. The Defiant was not like other ships in the United Earth Navy, where other vessels gleamed with polished titanium and advanced composite materials. The Defiant looked like someone had welded together spare parts from a dozen different shipyards. The ship's hull was a patchwork of different metals and alloys, each section telling a story of desperate repairs and creative engineering. Some panels were the standard navy gray, others were copper-colored from Martian foundries, and still others bore the distinctive blue tint of Luna-manufactured steel. To most observers, the Defiant looked like exactly what it was, a ship built from whatever materials could be scrounged together during humanity's darkest hour. 3 years ago, when the hegemony first attacked human space, Earth's shipyards had been burning. The alien alliance had struck without warning, their advanced technology making short work of humanity's finest vessels. The UES Enterprise, pride of the fleet, had lasted barely 10 minutes against a single hegemony cruiser. The UES Constitution had been vaporized before it could even return fire. In those desperate early days, every ship lost was a catastrophe humanity could not afford. The Defiant had been born from necessity and desperation. When the Titan shipyards were evacuated, Chief Engineer Marcus Webb had refused to leave behind the partially completed hull that would become the Defiant. Instead of following the evacuation protocol, he had gathered a crew of volunteers and worked around the clock to make the ship spaceworthy. They had raided abandoned stations for parts, salvaged components from destroyed vessels, and improvised solutions that made naval engineers back on Earth shake their heads in dismay. The result was a ship that looked like it belonged in a scrapyard rather than a battle line. The Defiant's weapons were a hodgepodge of different systems. Her main guns were salvaged plasma cannons from a destroyed cruiser, mounted on improvised hardpoints that had been welded directly to the hull. Her missile tubes were a mix of standard Navy launchers and civilian mining charges that had been retrofitted for combat. Her point defense systems included everything from military-grade laser clusters to modified asteroid mining lasers. Even her crew was unconventional. Commander Chen herself had been a transport pilot before the war, pressed into service when experienced captains became as scarce as replacement parts. Her tactical officer was a former merchant marine who had learned combat from simulation programs. Her chief engineer was Marcus Webb himself, the man who had built the ship with his own hands and knew every rivet and weld in her hull. The other ships in the fleet made no effort to hide their disdain. When the Defiant joined formations, she was invariably assigned to the rear guard or given escort duties far from the main action. Admiral Harrison, commander of the Third Fleet, had made his opinion clear during their last briefing. "The Defiant is a testament to human ingenuity," he had said, his tone making it clear he didn't mean it as a compliment. But ingenuity doesn't win battles against hegemony plasma lances and quantum torpedoes. "Keep her safe, Commander Chen. We need every ship we can get, even the ugly ones." The crew had heard similar comments at every port, every briefing, every joint exercise. The other ships' crews called them the junk pile or the salvage squad. Some of the more creative insults involved comparisons to garbage scows and mining barges. It stung, but Chen and her crew had learned to wear their ships humble. Origins as a badge of honor rather than shame. What the critics didn't understand was that the Defiant's unconventional construction was also her greatest strength. While other ships relied on standardized systems and procedures, the Defiant's crew had learned to think creatively. When a plasma conduit failed, they didn't wait for replacement parts from Earth. They improvised a solution using components from 3 different systems and got back into the fight. When their targeting computer was damaged, they modified a navigation computer to take its place and actually improved their accuracy in the process. The ship's appearance had also proven to be an unexpected tactical advantage. Hegemony commanders, accustomed to facing humanity's sleek and standardized warships, consistently underestimated the Defiant. They saw her mismatched hull and improvised weapons and assumed she was a support vessel or a crippled ship fleeing from battle. This misconception had saved them more than once, allowing the Defiant to get close enough to deliver devastating surprise attacks before the enemy realized their mistake. Today, however, would be different. Intelligence reports indicated that a massive hegemony fleet was gathering in the Kepler system, preparing for a final push toward Earth. Every available ship had been called to intercept them, including the Defiant. For the first time since the war began, humanity's patchwork warship would be fighting alongside the fleet's finest vessels. Chen studied the tactical display showing their destination. The Kepler system was strategically vital, controlling the main hyperspace route to the Sol system. If the hegemony fleet broke through, they could reach Earth within days. The human fleet gathering to stop them represented nearly everything humanity had left. If they failed here, there might not be another chance. "Commander," called Lieutenant Torres from the communication station, "we're receiving formation orders from Admiral Harrison. We're assigned to Group 7, rear escort position." Chen nodded, unsurprised. Group 7 was composed mainly of supply ships and damaged vessels returning to base. It was exactly where she expected the Defiant to be placed. The real fighting would be done by the fleet's heavy cruisers and the few remaining dreadnoughts. "Acknowledge the orders," she replied, "and send a message to all departments. Battle stations in 6 hours." As the crew began their preparations, Chen remained on the bridge watching the stars. Somewhere out there, the largest hegemony fleet ever assembled was waiting for them. Tomorrow, they would either save humanity or die trying. The Defiant might not look like much, but she was humanity's ship in every way that mattered. Built from scraps and determination, crewed by volunteers and survivors, she represented everything that made humanity dangerous to its enemies. They never gave up, never stopped fighting, and never stopped finding new ways to turn disadvantage into victory. Tomorrow, the galaxy would learn why underestimating humanity was always a mistake. The alarm klaxons echoed through the Defiant's corridors as the ship dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler system. Commander Chen felt the familiar lurch in her stomach as the artificial gravity compensators struggled to adjust to normal space. Around her, the bridge crew snapped to attention, their hands flying over control panels as they brought the ship to battle readiness. "Contact," shouted Ensign Park from the sensor station. "Multiple hegemony signatures bearing 037 Mark 15. Distance." "My God, Commander. I'm reading over 200 ships." Chen's blood ran cold. Intelligence had estimated the hegemony force at perhaps 80 vessels. 200 ships was more than the entire human fleet could handle, even at full strength. And they weren't at full strength. Disease, battle damage, and simple attrition had reduced their numbers to barely 60 operational vessels. "Get me Admiral Harrison," Chen ordered. The main screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of the UES Victorious, the fleet's flagship. Admiral Harrison looked older than Chen remembered, his face drawn with the weight of command and the knowledge of what they faced. Behind him, she could see his officers working frantically at their stations. "Commander Chen," Harrison said grimly, "I trust you're seeing the same sensor readings we are." "Yes, sir." 200 confirmed contacts, with more still emerging from hyperspace. "This is 3 times larger than intelligence projected." Harrison nodded slowly. "The hegemony has thrown everything they have at us. Every ship, every warrior, every weapon. They mean to end this war today, one way or another." On the tactical display, Chen could see the human fleet taking formation. The heavy units moved to the center, their massive hulls bristling with weapons. The cruisers formed a protective screen around them, while the destroyers spread out to guard the flanks. And at the rear, almost forgotten, Group 7 maintained its escort position with the supply ships and damaged vessels. "Sir," Chen said carefully, "the Defiant requests permission to join the main battle line." Harrison's expression softened slightly. "Commander, I appreciate your courage, but the Defiant isn't equipped for this kind of engagement. Stay with Group 7 and protect our support vessels. If things go badly, you may be all that stands between the hegemony and our evacuation ships." The transmission ended, leaving Chen staring at a blank screen. Around her, the bridge crew maintained their professionalism, but she could see the disappointment in their faces. They had trained for this moment, prepared for the chance to prove themselves in a real battle, only to be relegated to guard duty once again. "Commander," Lieutenant Torres said quietly, "incoming transmission from the UES Phoenix. Captain Morrison wants to speak with you." The screen came alive again, this time showing the weathered face of Captain James Morrison. The Phoenix was one of the fleet's newer vessels, sleek and powerful, everything the Defiant was not. Morrison had been one of the few captains who had treated Chen and her crew with respect rather than disdain. "Sarah," Morrison said, using her first name despite the formal channel. I wanted you to know that some of us see what you've accomplished with that ship of yours. The Defiant may not look like much, but she's got something the rest of us don't. What's that, Captain? Heart, Morrison replied simply. Your crew has been through hell and kept fighting. They've taken a pile of scrap and turned it into something that works. Don't let anyone tell you that doesn't matter. Before Chen could respond, new alarms began sounding throughout the ship. The hegemony fleet was moving, their massive vessels advancing in perfect formation like a tide of destruction. At their head flew the flagship of War Commander Thexanel, the same alien who had led the assault on Earth's outer colonies. The human fleet moved to intercept, their own formation spreading out to maximize their firepower. The two forces closed on each other with the inexorable certainty of a natural disaster. In minutes, the largest space battle in human history would begin. All ships, came Admiral Harrison's voice over the fleet channel. This is it. Today we make our stand. Today we show these aliens what humanity is made of. All ships engage at will. Space erupted in fire and death. The human fleet's opening salvo lit up the darkness with hundreds of plasma beams and missile trails. The hegemony responded with their own weapons, their infamous quantum torpedoes tearing through space like miniature black holes. Ships on both sides began dying within moments of the first shot. From her position at the rear of the formation, Chen watched helplessly as the battle unfolded. The UES Intrepid, a heavy cruiser she had served on early in her career, took a direct hit from a hegemony plasma lance and broke apart in a flash of brilliant light. The destroyer UES Hornet managed to ram a damaged alien cruiser, both ships dying in a spectacular explosion that lit up half the battlefield. Commander, Chief Engineer Webb's voice crackled over the intercom. I'm showing massive energy spikes from the hegemony fleet. Something big is charging up. Chen's blood turned to ice as she realized what was happening. Intelligence reports had mentioned rumors of a new hegemony superweapon, something called a system killer. If those reports were true, and if the aliens were desperate enough to use it here, all ships, Admiral Harrison's voice cut through the tactical channel, raw with desperation. Priority override. All vessels converge on coordinates 774 Mark 889. They're charging some kind of massive weapon. The human fleet began to turn, but they were too far away and too engaged with the enemy screening force. Even at maximum burn, the closest ships wouldn't reach the hegemony formation core for at least 10 minutes. The weapon, whatever it was, would fire long before then. Chen stared at the tactical display, her mind racing. The Defiant was closer to the enemy formation than any other human ship, positioned almost perfectly to intercept the weapon if she could break free from Group 7. But Admiral Harrison's orders had been clear. Stay with the support vessels and avoid engagement. Commander, Torres said urgently, I'm detecting massive gravitational distortions from the hegemony flagship. Whatever they're building up to, it's going to happen soon. Chen looked around her bridge, seeing the faces of her crew. These people had followed her through impossible situations, had trusted her judgment when everyone else had written them off. They deserved better than to sit on the sidelines while their fleet died. All stations, she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the ship. This is the commander. We've been given escort duty, but sometimes escort duty means more than just following orders. Sometimes it means doing what's right. She turned to the helm officer. Lieutenant Barnes, plot an intercept course for the hegemony flagship. Maximum burn. Aye, Commander, Barnes replied, his hands already flying over his controls. Torres, send a message to Group 7. Tell them the Defiant is moving to engage the enemy superweapon. We'll try to buy them time to escape if this goes wrong. As the Defiant began to turn away from the support formation, Chen felt a familiar sensation settling over her. It was the same feeling she had experienced during their first engagement with hegemony forces, when they had been outnumbered and outgunned, but had somehow found a way to win. It was the feeling of a crew that refused to give up, no matter what the odds. The Defiant might be a ship built from spare parts and determination, but today she would prove that sometimes that was enough. Today, the ship everyone mocked would have her chance to save the fleet. The Defiant burned hard through the chaos of battle, her mismatched engines pushing her far beyond their design specifications. Commander Chen gripped her command chair as the ship shuddered under the strain, watching the tactical display as they closed on the hegemony formation. Around them, the battle raged with devastating intensity, but her focus remained fixed on their target, the massive alien flagship where the superweapon was charging. "Commander," Chief Engineer Webb's voice crackled through the intercom, strain evident in his tone. "I'm pushing these engines past redline. The port fusion reactor is running hot, and the starboard plasma conduits are showing stress fractures. We can maintain this burn for maybe 10 more minutes before something catastrophic happens." "Understood, Chief. How long until we reach firing range?" "At current velocity, 7 minutes to optimal torpedo range, 12 minutes to reach the hegemony flagship." Chen studied the tactical readout. The enemy superweapon would fire in approximately 8 minutes according to their best estimates. They could launch torpedoes before then, but the Defiant's improvised missile systems were hardly the most accurate in the fleet. To guarantee a hit on something as important as a superweapon, they would need to get much closer. "Commander," Ensign Park called out from sensors, "I'm detecting incoming hegemony fighters bearing 270 Mark 15. 12 contacts closing fast." On the main screen, Chen could see the sleek alien fighters streaking toward them. Each one was larger than a human fighter, but more maneuverable than anything in their fleet. Worse, the Defiant's point defense systems were already engaged with debris and stray weapons fire from the main battle. They would be sitting ducks. "All hands, brace for impact," Chen announced. "Point defense, engage those fighters. Navigation, evasive maneuvers." The Defiant twisted and rolled as Lieutenant Barnes threw the ship into a complex evasive pattern. The alien fighters responded by splitting into 2 groups, one diving below their trajectory while the other climbed above. It was a classic pincer movement, designed to ensure that no matter which way their target turned, some of the attackers would have a clear shot. The first energy beams lanced past the Defiant's hull, close enough to overload several sensor arrays. The second volley found its mark, striking the ship's port side and punching through 3 decks before the emergency force fields could seal the breaches. Warning lights flashed across the bridge as damage reports flooded in. "Direct hit to Cargo Bay 3, Torres reported. "We've lost atmospheric containment on decks 5 through 7. No casualties reported, but we're venting air." Chen watched helplessly as 2 more fighters lined up for attack runs. The Defiant's point defense lasers were tracking them, but the improvised targeting system couldn't keep up with the alien's superior speed and maneuverability. At this rate, they would be destroyed long before reaching the hegemony flagship. Then Chief Engineer Webb's voice came over the intercom, calm despite the chaos around them. "Commander, I have an idea. It's dangerous and probably insane, but it might work." "I'm listening, Chief." "Those mining charges we retrofitted as missiles? They're designed to crack asteroids, which means they have variable yield settings. If I reconfigure the warheads and overload the fusion cores, I can turn them into proximity mines. We drop them in the fighter's path and detonate them manually." Chen didn't hesitate. "Do it." The next few minutes passed in a blur of violent maneuvers and desperate improvisation. The Defiant continued her headlong charge toward the enemy flagship, while Webb and his team worked frantically to convert their missiles into mines. The alien fighters pressed their attack, their energy weapons carving chunks from the human ship's hull. Deck by deck, system by system, the Defiant was being torn apart. "Mines ready," Webb announced, releasing them now. A dozen modified mining charges spaced themselves along the Defiant's wake, their proximity sensors armed and waiting. The alien fighters, focused on their attack runs, flew directly into the trap. The first mine detonated as a fighter passed within 50 meters, the overloaded fusion core creating a brilliant flash that vaporized the alien craft instantly. The other fighters tried to scatter, but they were moving too fast and too close together. Within seconds, 8 of the 12 fighters had been destroyed. The remaining aliens, apparently deciding that discretion was the better part of valor, broke off their attack and retreated toward their main fleet. But the damage to the Defiant was severe. Atmosphere continued to vent from multiple hull breaches. 3 of her main plasma conduits had failed, and her starboard engine was operating at only 60% efficiency. "Status report," Chen ordered. "We're hurt, but still functional," Torres replied. "Life support is stable, weapons are operational, and we still have engine power. Chief Webb says he can keep us moving for another 15 minutes before we need to shut down for repairs." Chen looked at the tactical display. They were now only 4 minutes from torpedo range of the hegemony flagship, but the superweapon would fire in less than 6 minutes. The timing would be impossibly close. "Commander," Park said urgently, "I'm detecting massive energy buildups throughout the enemy fleet. It's not just the flagship. They're all charging weapons. Chen's heart sank as she realized the truth. The hegemony superweapon wasn't a single massive gun mounted on their flagship. It was a coordinated bombardment from their entire fleet, timed to create a devastating focused attack that could destroy planets. The aliens had learned from humanity's tendency to scatter and survive. This time they meant to make sure nothing was left. "How many ships are participating in the bombardment?" she asked. Park worked frantically at his console. "All of them, Commander. Every hegemony vessel in the system is charging weapons and targeting the same coordinates. They're aiming for Earth." The full scope of the alien plan became clear. This wasn't just an attack on the human fleet. It was a coordinated strike designed to bypass the battle entirely and destroy humanity's homeworld directly. Even if the human fleet somehow won the engagement, it wouldn't matter if Earth was reduced to a radioactive wasteland. "Time to firing?" Chen asked, though she dreaded the answer. 5 minutes, 30 seconds. Chen stared at the tactical display, her mind racing through possibilities. The Defiant couldn't possibly destroy 200 ships in 5 minutes. Even if they had the firepower, which they didn't, there simply wasn't enough time. But maybe they didn't need to destroy the entire fleet. Maybe they just needed to disrupt the targeting network. "Torres, scan the enemy formation for command and control ships. Look for vessels with enhanced communication arrays or unusual energy signatures." "Scanning now," Torres replied. After a moment, her face lit up. "Commander, I'm detecting a cluster of 5 ships in the center of the formation. They're broadcasting targeting data to the rest of the fleet on a quantum frequency. If those ships were destroyed, the targeting network would collapse," Chen finished. "The other ships wouldn't be able to coordinate their bombardment." It was still an impossible task. 5 heavily defended ships in the center of an enemy formation, protected by screening vessels and point defense systems. But it was better than trying to destroy 200 ships. "All hands," Chen announced over the ship's intercom. "This is the commander. In 4 minutes, the hegemony fleet is going to fire on Earth. We're the only ship in position to stop them. I won't lie to you. This is probably a suicide mission. But if we don't try, humanity dies today." She paused, looking around at her bridge crew. These people had followed her through impossible odds before. They had trusted her judgment when the rest of the fleet had written them off. Now she was asking them to trust her one more time. "Anyone who wants to can reach the escape pods. I won't think less of anyone who chooses to save themselves." Nobody moved. Not a single person on the bridge even looked toward the exits. "Well then," Chen said, a fierce smile crossing her face, "let's go save the world." The Defiant screamed through space toward the heart of the hegemony formation. Every system pushed beyond its limits. Commander Chen watched the tactical display as they closed on the 5 command ships that controlled the superweapon targeting network. 3 minutes until the coordinated bombardment would destroy Earth. 3 minutes to save humanity. "Chief Webb," Chen called over the intercom, "I need everything you can give me. Weapons, shields, engines. Strip power from life support if you have to." "Already on it, Commander," Webb replied, his voice tight with concentration. "I'm rerouting power from the artificial gravity generators and the backup environmental systems. We'll have maybe 90 seconds of maximum power before things start shutting down automatically." The hegemony screening ships had noticed their approach now. Plasma beams and quantum torpedoes began reaching out toward the Defiant, forcing Lieutenant Barnes to throw the ship into increasingly violent evasive maneuvers. Each near miss sent shockwaves through the hull, and several direct hits overloaded their makeshift shield generators in brilliant cascades of energy. "Shields at 40%, Torres reported. "Hull breaches on decks 4, 6, and 9. Emergency teams are responding, but we're losing atmosphere fast." Chen gripped her command chair as another plasma beam scorched past the bridge viewports, close enough to create visible distortions in the reinforced transparent aluminum. Around her, the bridge crew worked with calm professionalism despite the chaos. Sparks flew from overloaded consoles, warning alarms wailed constantly, and the deck shuddered under their feet, but nobody panicked. "Commander," Ensign Park called out, "the command ships are changing formation. They're moving to put the screening vessels between us and them." On the tactical display, Chen could see the alien strategy unfolding. The 5 command ships were repositioning themselves behind a wall of cruisers and destroyers, using their own fleet as a shield. To reach them, the Defiant would have to fight through at least a dozen heavily armed vessels. It was impossible, or maybe it wasn't. Torres, can you get me Chief Webb on a secure channel? Patching you through now. Webb's voice came through clearly despite the battle noise in the background. I'm here, Commander. What do you need? That crazy idea you mentioned about overloading the mining charges? Could you do the same thing with our main fusion reactor? There was a long pause before Webb responded. Theoretically, yes. If I bypass the safety interlocks and remove the containment field governors, I could turn the entire reactor into a massive fusion bomb. But Commander, that would destroy the ship. There's no way to contain that kind of explosion. How big an explosion are we talking about? Big enough to vaporize everything within a 5-kilometer radius and severely damage anything within 20 kilometers. It would be like detonating a small star. Chen studied the tactical display. The hegemony command ships were positioned roughly 3 kilometers apart from each other, with the screening vessels spread out in a protective formation around them. If the Defiant could get close enough to the center of that formation before detonating, how long would you need to prepare the reactor overload? 2 minutes to remove the safeties and reprogram the containment system. Maybe less if I ignore some of the standard procedures. Do it, Chen ordered. And Chief? Thank you for everything. It's been an honor serving with you, Commander. Chen turned to address her bridge crew. All hands, this is the Commander. Chief Webb is preparing to overload our fusion reactor. We're going to ram the center of the enemy formation and detonate ourselves. Anyone who wants to reach the escape pods has about 90 seconds. Lieutenant Barnes turned from his navigation console. Commander, with respect, where exactly would we escape to? We're in the middle of an enemy fleet. The escape pods have enough range to reach our fleet, Chen replied. You might make it, Barnes smiled grimly. Might isn't good enough. Besides, someone needs to fly this ship into the target. That's my job. One by one, the other bridge officers voiced their agreement. Torres from communications, Park from sensors, even the junior technicians manning the backup stations. They were staying with their ship, staying with their captain, staying with each other. Well then, Chen said, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. Let's make this count. Barnes, plot a course directly through the screening ships to the center of the command formation. Don't worry about evasive maneuvers anymore. Just get us there as fast as possible. Aye, Commander. Plotting ramming course now. The Defiant's course straightened as Barnes locked their trajectory on the center of the enemy formation. Immediately, the incoming fire intensified as the hegemony ships realized what the humans were attempting. Plasma beams carved through the Defiant's armor plating. Quantum torpedoes detonated against her shields, and particle beams heated sections of her hull to glowing red. Shields down, Torres reported calmly. Hull breaches on all decks. We're taking heavy damage, but primary systems are still operational. On the main screen, Chen could see the enemy ships growing larger as they approached. The hegemony vessels were beautiful in their own way, sleek and organic looking, like living creatures adapted for the void of space. Their weapons fired in coordinated patterns, creating a web of destruction that should have been impossible to penetrate. But the Defiant was no ordinary ship. Built from spare parts and desperation, crewed by volunteers and survivors, she had already achieved the impossible simply by existing. Now in her final moments, she would achieve something even greater. 1 minute to impact, Barnes announced. Chief Webb reports the reactor overload is ready. Detonation will occur on your command. Chen watched the tactical display as they closed on the enemy formation. The screening ships were trying to intercept them now, moving to block their path to the command vessels. But they were too late. The Defiant's momentum would carry her through their formation and into the heart of the enemy fleet. Incoming transmission from Admiral Harrison. Torres reported. Put him through. Admiral Harrison's face appeared on the screen, his expression showing a mixture of admiration and grief. Commander Chen, we're tracking your approach. I want you to know that what you're doing today will be remembered. The Defiant may not have looked like much, but she turned out to be exactly what humanity needed. Thank you, Admiral. Take care of Earth for us. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in relative quiet except for the sounds of battle damage and failing systems. Chen looked around at her crew one final time. These people had followed her into the impossible and made it look routine. They deserved better than this ending, but they had chosen it freely. 30 seconds to impact, Barnes announced. The enemy command ships loomed ahead of them now, their hulls bristling with weapons and sensor arrays. Chen could see the energy buildups that would soon destroy Earth, the targeting systems that would guide the coordinated bombardment to its target. In 20 seconds, those systems would be nothing but expanding plasma. 10 seconds, Barnes called out. Chen took a deep breath and opened the ship-wide channel one final time. All hands, this is Commander Chen. It has been my honor to serve with you. Today we save humanity. Today we win. 5 seconds. Chen's hand hovered over the detonation control. Now. For Earth, she whispered, and pressed the button. The explosion that consumed the Defiant and the heart of the hegemony formation was visible from the edge of the solar system. For a brief moment, a new star blazed in the darkness of space, its fusion fire reaching temperatures that matched the cores of suns. The 5 command ships vanished instantly, vaporized by energies beyond comprehension. The screening vessels that had tried to protect them lasted only microseconds longer before they too were consumed by the expanding sphere of destruction. Admiral Harrison watched from the bridge of the Victorious as the shockwave spread outward from the explosion site. The remaining hegemony ships, suddenly cut off from their targeting network, fired their charged weapons wildly into space. Without the coordinated targeting data from the command vessels, their superweapon bombardment became nothing more than random energy discharges that posed no threat to Earth or the human fleet. Status report, Harrison ordered, though his eyes remained fixed on the fading light where the Defiant had made her final stand. Sir, his tactical officer reported, the hegemony fleet is in complete disarray. Their formation is collapsing, and they're receiving contradictory orders from multiple sources. It appears the destruction of the command ships has left them without central coordination. Around the human fleet, a strange silence fell over the communications channels. For 3 years they had fought a desperate defensive war against an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move. The hegemony's superior technology and coordination had made them nearly invincible. Now suddenly, the aliens were as confused and scattered as any normal military force cut off from its command structure. Captain Morrison's voice crackled through the fleet channel from the Phoenix. Admiral, the enemy's right flank is completely exposed. If we strike now while they're still reorganizing. All ships, Harrison announced, his voice carrying clearly through the fleet. This is Admiral Harrison. The Defiant has given us our chance. All vessels, advance and engage. Show these aliens what happens when they threaten humanity. The human fleet surged forward like a pack of wolves scenting wounded prey. Ships that had been fighting defensively for years suddenly found themselves with the advantage, striking at confused and disorganized enemies. The UES Phoenix led the charge, her plasma cannons carving through a hegemony cruiser that was still trying to re-establish contact with its fleet command. The destroyer UES Ranger rammed a damaged alien vessel, both ships dying in a brilliant explosion that cleared the way for the cruisers behind her. What followed was not so much a battle as a rout. Without their command structure, the hegemony ships fought as individuals rather than as a coordinated force. Their superior technology could not overcome the sudden tactical disadvantage, and ship after ship fell to concentrated human fire. Some alien vessels attempted to retreat, but the human fleet was in no mood to let them escape. War Commander Thexnal, aboard his flagship at the rear of the hegemony formation, watched in growing horror as his fleet disintegrated around him. 3 years of careful planning, the assembled might of the entire hegemony war machine, reduced to chaos by a single human ship that had looked like it belonged in a scrapyard. Status of the targeting network, he demanded of his communications officer. All primary command nodes are destroyed, War Commander. Secondary systems are attempting to re-establish control, but the humans are jamming our frequencies and targeting our communication relays. It will take hours to restore coordination. Hours they did not have. The human fleet was already among them, picking off isolated ships with ruthless efficiency. In his arrogance, Thexnal had concentrated his entire fleet in one system, believing that their superior numbers and coordination would guarantee victory. Now that coordination was gone, and his fleet was trapped with nowhere to run. All ships, Thexnal broadcast on an emergency frequency, withdraw to hyperspace immediately, abort the operation and return to base. But even that simple order was confused by the chaos of battle. Some ships received the message and began charging their hyperspace drives. Others, still engaged in individual battles, fought on without receiving the retreat order. Still others received corrupted versions of the message that told them to advance rather than withdraw. The retreat became another disaster. Ships trying to reach safe hyperspace jump distances collided with vessels still fighting, Damaged ships that had lost their faster-than-light capabilities were abandoned by their fleeing comrades. Within minutes, the organized withdrawal became a panicked rout that left dozens of hegemony vessels stranded in normal space. Admiral Harrison coordinated the human pursuit with grim satisfaction. His ships moved through the scattered alien formation like reapers through grain, destroying anything that couldn't escape. The Phoenix accounted for 3 enemy vessels before her ammunition ran low. The Victorious herself destroyed the alien flagship with a concentrated barrage that left nothing but expanding debris. When the last hegemony ship finally jumped to hyperspace, barely 60 vessels remained of the mighty fleet that had entered the system. More than 2/3 of their force had been destroyed or captured, including irreplaceable command ships and their most experienced crews. It was the worst military disaster in hegemony history, but the cost to humanity had been severe as well. The Defiant was gone along with her entire crew. The destroyer Ranger had been lost in her ramming attack. The cruiser Intrepid had been destroyed in the early stages of the battle. Dozens of other ships had suffered significant damage, and casualty reports were still coming in. "Sir," the communications officer reported, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth Command." Admiral Harrison nodded. "Put it through." The main screen showed the familiar face of Fleet Admiral Sarah Martinez, commander of all human space forces. Her expression was somber, but there was something else there as well. Pride, perhaps, or simply the relief of someone who had been preparing for the worst and received something far better. "Admiral Harrison," Martinez said, "congratulations on your victory. The entire solar system watched your battle. When that ship exploded in the center of the enemy formation, well, I don't think there was a dry eye on Earth." "The credit belongs to Commander Chen and the crew of the Defiant," Harrison replied. "They made the sacrifice that won this battle. I've already spoken with President Williams about awarding the Defiant's crew the Medal of Honor posthumously. But there's something else, Admiral. Our long-range sensors are detecting hegemony fleet movements throughout their territory. It appears they're withdrawing from several forward positions and consolidating their forces." Harrison frowned. "A strategic withdrawal?" "It looks like it. The destruction of their main battle fleet here has apparently convinced them that continuing this war might not be in their best interests. Our intelligence services are reporting that several hegemony member species are calling for peace negotiations." For the first time in 3 years, Admiral Harrison allowed himself to hope. The war might not be over, but humanity had proven something important today. They had shown that human determination and ingenuity could overcome even the most overwhelming odds. They had demonstrated that underestimating humanity was always a fatal mistake. As the human fleet began the long process of collecting their wounded and salvaging what they could from the battlefield, Harrison found himself thinking about the ship that had made it all possible. The Defiant had been mocked by her own fleet, dismissed as a collection of spare parts held together by determination and prayer. But in the end, she had been exactly what humanity needed. Sometimes the most unlikely heroes were the most effective ones. 6 months after the Battle of Kepler, the memorial service for the crew of the UES Defiant drew representatives from across human space. The ceremony was held at the Titan Naval Academy, the same facility where Chief Engineer Marcus Webb had once salvaged parts to build his impossible ship. Now in the Academy's main auditorium, the greatest military leaders of humanity gathered to honor those who had saved their species. Admiral Harrison stood at the podium, looking out at an audience that included not only human dignitaries, but also representatives from several alien species. The hegemony's crushing defeat at Kepler had indeed triggered widespread peace negotiations, and many of their former allies were now seeking accommodation with humanity. "We gather today," Harrison began, "not just to remember the fallen, but to understand what their sacrifice means for the future of human civilization." The crew of the Defiant numbered 237 souls. Engineers, gunners, navigation specialists, medical personnel, technicians, and officers. They came from every corner of human space, united by their determination to serve despite having been given a ship that nobody expected to survive its first engagement. In the front row sat President Williams, her face solemn as she listened to the Admiral's words. Beside her were family members of the Defiant's crew, people who had lost loved ones but gained something equally precious: the knowledge that their sacrifice had saved humanity. Among them was Marcus Webb's daughter, Elena, herself an engineer who had followed in her father's footsteps. The Defiant was born from desperation, Harrison continued, built from salvaged parts and powered by human ingenuity. Her creators had no advanced materials, no cutting-edge technology, no massive industrial base to draw from. What they had was something far more valuable, the refusal to give up in the face of impossible odds. Behind the Admiral, a holographic display showed images of the Defiant throughout her brief but remarkable career. The ship looked exactly as ungainly and improvised as everyone remembered. Her hull a patchwork of different materials, and her weapons an eclectic mix of salvaged systems. But there was something else in those images now, something that had been invisible to most observers during the war. Dignity. The ship that had once been dismissed as a junk pile now appeared noble in her very imperfection. Her mismatched hull plates told a story of resourcefulness and determination. Her improvised weapons spoke of creativity and adaptation. Her crew's modifications and repairs were no longer signs of inadequacy, but badges of honor. In the months following the battle, Harrison said, "Our intelligence services have learned more about the impact of the Defiant's actions. The destruction of the Hegemony Command Fleet did more than simply disrupt their attack on Earth. It shattered their confidence in their own superiority. For the first time in their history, they had suffered a decisive defeat at the hands of what they considered a primitive species." The audience listened in rapt attention as Harrison described the political upheaval that had swept through Hegemony space following their defeat. 3 member species had withdrawn from the alliance entirely, declaring their intention to negotiate separate peace treaties with humanity. 2 others had overthrown their war faction governments and installed leaders committed to ending the conflict. Even among the core hegemony species, public support for the war had collapsed. But perhaps the most significant change, Harrison continued, has been in how we see ourselves. For 3 years, humanity fought a defensive war, always reacting to enemy initiatives, always trying to survive the next attack. The Defiant sacrifice changed that. We learned that our greatest strength was not in matching our enemy's advanced technology, but in refusing to be defeated by it. The memorial service included testimonials from other ship captains who had served alongside the Defiant. Captain Morrison of the Phoenix spoke about the ship's unconventional tactics and the crew's ability to find solutions that no manual had ever described. Commander Sarah Torres, who had served as the Defiant's communications officer before transferring to another vessel, months before the final battle, shared stories of the crew's determination and their unwavering loyalty to each other. But the most moving testimony came from an unexpected source. A hegemony prisoner of war, captured during the Battle of Kepler, had requested permission to speak at the ceremony. War Commander Thexnall himself, former leader of the alien fleet, now sat in human custody awaiting the outcome of peace negotiations. "I have spent my entire adult life in service to the hegemony," Thexnall said through a universal translator, his alien features somehow conveying genuine respect. "I was taught that humans were primitive, chaotic, incapable of true military excellence. We believed that your lack of standardization and coordination made you weak." The alien paused, his translated words carrying weight in the silence of the auditorium. "The ship you called Defiant proved us wrong in every possible way. It was built from scraps, crewed by what we would have considered misfits and equipped with systems that no proper military would have accepted. By every measure of efficiency and standardization that we value, it should have been worthless. Instead, it destroyed the most powerful fleet ever assembled by the hegemony." Thexnall's next words sent a murmur through the audience. "Your ship succeeded precisely because it was different, because it could not be predicted or categorized, because its crew thought like no military doctrine taught them to think. We prepared for war against your best ships, your most advanced vessels, your most conventional forces. We never prepared for war against your determination to succeed with whatever tools you had available." The ceremony concluded with the unveiling of a memorial that would stand permanently on the Academy grounds. The monument was, appropriately, built from salvaged materials. Hull plates from destroyed ships, metal from the ruins of battle stations, components from vessels that had fought and died in humanity's darkest hour. At its center stood a holographic projector that displayed a rotating image of the Defiant, forever preserved in her moment of greatest triumph. But the real memorial to the Defiant's crew was already under construction in shipyards across human space. A new class of vessels, officially designated as the Defiant class, was being built to embody the lessons learned from that remarkable ship. These new vessels incorporated the best of human technology, but they also included something more important: the design philosophy that had made the original Defiant so effective. Each Defiant-class ship was deliberately built with modular systems that could be easily modified or replaced. Their crews were trained not just in standard procedures, but in improvisation and creative problem-solving. Most importantly, they were designed to prove that humanity's greatest strength lay not in copying their enemies' advantages, but in turning their own supposed weaknesses into unexpected assets. Elena Webb, Marcus Webb's daughter, had been selected to serve as chief engineer on the first of these new vessels. As she stood before the memorial, looking up at the holographic image of her father's impossible ship, she made a quiet promise. The new Defiant-class vessels would carry on the tradition of the original. They would prove that human ingenuity and determination could overcome any obstacle. The ship everyone had mocked had become the template for humanity's future. In death, the Defiant had achieved something that even victory could not have provided. She had changed the way humanity saw itself. No longer would they see themselves as inferior to their enemies' advanced technology. Instead, they would embrace their ability to succeed with whatever tools they had, to find solutions where none seemed to exist, and to never surrender no matter how impossible the odds. The ceremony ended with a moment of silence for the fallen, but it felt more like the beginning of something than an ending. The Defiant's legacy would live on in every ship that refused to give up, every crew that found a way to make the impossible work, and every human who remembered that sometimes the most unlikely heroes were exactly what the galaxy needed. 20 years after the Battle of Kepler, Admiral Elena Webb stood on the bridge of the UES Defiant II, watching as her ship emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Andromeda Transit. The second ship to bear the name was everything her father's original creation had been and more. A vessel built from the finest materials humanity could produce, equipped with technology that surpassed anything the hegemony had ever deployed, yet still carrying the spirit of improvisation and determination that had made the first Defiant legendary. Contact established with the Arcturian delegation, reported Commander Lisa Park, daughter of the censor officer who had died alongside Elena's father. They're requesting permission to come aboard for the signing ceremony. Elena nodded, her attention divided between the present moment and memories of the stories her father had told her about his impossible ship. She had been only 12 when the Defiant made her final voyage, but the impact of that sacrifice had shaped her entire life. Now, as the commanding officer of humanity's flagship, she was about to witness something that would have seemed impossible during those dark days of war. The formal establishment of the Galactic Confederation, a peaceful alliance between humanity and 47 other species. The irony was not lost on her. The ship that everyone had mocked for being built from spare parts had inspired a new philosophy of cooperation and adaptation that now governed relations between species across the galaxy. The Defiant Doctrine, as military historians called it, had become the foundation for a new kind of diplomacy, one that valued diversity over uniformity, creativity over rigid protocol, and the strength that came from working with whatever resources were available. "Admiral," came Chief Engineer Sarah Morrison's voice over the intercom, granddaughter of the Phoenix's captain, who had shown respect for the original Defiant's crew. "I've completed the final systems check. All departments report ready for the ceremony." Elena smiled at the family connections that seemed to bind the new Defiant to the old. When she had been given command of the ship, she had specifically requested crew members who carried on the traditions of those who had served before. Not because of their bloodlines, but because they understood what the Defiant name represented. The new ship was a marvel of engineering that would have amazed the original crew. Her hull was constructed from quantum-bonded materials that could adapt their properties based on environmental conditions. Her weapon systems incorporated technology reverse-engineered from captured hegemony vessels, improved by human innovation, and married to completely new theories of energy manipulation. Her engines could achieve speeds that would have been considered impossible 20 years ago, but more importantly, she embodied the spirit that had made her predecessor legendary. Every system was designed for modularity and adaptation. Her crew trained constantly in creative problem-solving and unconventional tactics. Her very design philosophy rejected the idea that there was only one correct way to accomplish any objective. Incoming transmission from the hegemony delegation, Commander Park announced. War Commander Thexnall requests permission to speak with you privately before the ceremony begins. Elena considered the request carefully. Thexnall had spent 15 years in human custody before being released as part of the peace negotiations. During that time, he had become something unexpected, one of humanity's most effective ambassadors to other species. His testimony about the original Defiant's impact had helped convince dozens of former hegemony allies to join the new confederation. Put him through in my ready room, Elena decided. The elderly alien's face appeared on her private screen, his features showing the wear of advanced age, but his eyes still sharp with intelligence. The translator no longer seemed necessary. Thexnall had learned to speak human languages fluently during his years of captivity and subsequent diplomatic service. Admiral Webb, he said in accented but clear English, I wanted to speak with you before today's ceremony. There is something I have never told anyone about the Battle of Kepler, something I think you should know about your father's final moments. Elena leaned forward, intrigued. The official records of the battle were comprehensive, but they were compiled from external sensor data and communications intercepts. Nobody had survived aboard the Defiant to provide a first-hand account of what had happened in those final seconds. Our flagship's sensors were exceptionally advanced, Thexnall continued. In the moments before your father's ship detonated, we detected something that our technicians initially dismissed as sensor error. The Defiant's engines had failed completely. Her fusion reactor was in cascade overload. According to our readings, the ship was dead in space. Elena frowned. The official reports indicate that the Defiant maintained course and speed right up to the moment of detonation. That is correct, Thexnall replied. But the ship was not being propelled by her engines. Our analysis showed that the crew had somehow rigged their maneuvering thrusters, emergency power cells, and even their life support systems to provide thrust. They were literally pushing their dead ship forward using whatever systems still functioned. The implications hit Elena like a physical blow. Her father and his crew had known their ship was dying, had known their mission was hopeless but had continued anyway. They had found a way to complete their objective using nothing but emergency systems and sheer determination. There is more, Thexnall said gently. Our communications intercepts recorded one final transmission from your ship, broadcast on an emergency frequency. It was your father's voice speaking to his crew in those last moments. He said, "This is what we do. This is who we are. We find a way." Elena felt tears threatening, but she maintained her composure. Why are you telling me this now? Because today we formalize an alliance between 48 species, each bringing their own strengths and weaknesses to a common cause. This confederation exists because your father's ship proved that diversity and adaptation are more powerful than uniformity and overwhelming force. The galaxy learned that lesson from a ship built from spare parts and crewed by people who refused to give up. The alien paused, his expression thoughtful. But I think the most important lesson is one that your species taught all of us, that the true measure of strength is not what you have, but what you do with whatever you have available. Your father and his crew found a way to save humanity, using a dead ship and emergency systems. Today we find a way to build lasting peace using species that were enemies just 20 years ago. The ceremony that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Representatives from dozens of species gathered aboard the Defiant II to sign the Confederation Charter. But the event was deliberately informal and adaptive. Rather than rigid protocol, the ceremony incorporated traditions from every member species. Instead of a single signing document, each delegation contributed something unique to a collective archive that would serve as the Confederation's founding document. The humans contributed technical specifications for adaptive starship design, sharing the lessons learned from the original Defiant's unconventional construction. The hegemony species offered their advanced standardization protocols, but modified to allow for creative interpretation. Other species brought their own innovations: quantum communication networks, biotechnology applications, energy manipulation techniques, and philosophical frameworks that had never been combined before. As Elena watched the ceremony unfold, she realized that they were creating something that embodied the same spirit as her father's ship. The Confederation was not a standardized alliance forced to conform to a single model. Instead, It was an adaptive organization that drew strength from its diversity, finding ways to make different species' capabilities work together toward common goals. "Admiral," Commander Park said softly, "incoming transmission from Earth. President Martinez wants to congratulate you on the successful establishment of the Confederation." Elena nodded, but her attention remained focused on the ceremony. Through the viewports, she could see ships from dozens of species maintaining formation around the Defiant II. Each vessel was unique, reflecting the design philosophies and capabilities of its builders. Together, they formed something greater than the sum of their parts. The original Defiant had been mocked for being different, for being built from spare parts and unconventional solutions. But that difference had been her greatest strength. Now, 20 years later, the entire galaxy was learning to embrace the same philosophy: diversity over uniformity, adaptation over rigid doctrine, the strength to find a way, no matter what resources were available. As the ceremony concluded and the Confederation officially came into existence, Elena felt her father's presence in the bridge around her. The ship that everyone had mocked had not just saved humanity. She had changed the entire galaxy's understanding of what strength really meant. The Defiant's legacy lived on, not just in the ship that bore her name, but in a galaxy that had learned to find strength in diversity and hope in the most unlikely places. Sometimes the most impossible solutions were exactly what the universe needed.